Welcome to Active Shooter, the podcast.
After decades now of mass shootings, we haven't found the answer.
A tribute to the victims of two mass shootings.
Thank you for listening to Active Shooter, the podcast.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Before we get started, we have some Patreon shout-outs. Big thank you to Marie Cole and Adam Payette for contributing to our Patreon. If you are interested in receiving special perks and supporting Active Shooter, the podcast, go to www.patreon.com/activethepodcast.
Santa Monica police say as many as 6 people are now dead and several others hurt in that shooting, and that number does not include the suspect who was shot to death by police. Shots rang out just before noon today at a neighborhood in Santa Monica and then at Santa Monica College. The college was put on lockdown. It's still on lockdown tonight, 90% cleared so far. The Santa Monica police chief says the shooter first killed 2 people inside a home that was set on fire. He then shot and killed 2 more people a few blocks away, and then another 2 on the college campus. The shooter was killed by police in the library of the college, but someone police are calling a person of interest is in custody right now. Students were studying for final exams when this all happened and were told to evacuate.
On June 7th, 2013, President Barack Obama was scheduled to speak at a private event, which was located at the residence of a local member of the entertainment industry in Santa Monica, California. The whole town was on edge, knowing that the entire city would soon be crawling with police and the president's Secret Service team. So when Deborah Fine was driving down a side road, trying to avoid the subsequent heavy traffic, she didn't think anything of it when she saw a man ask the vehicle in front of her to pull over. After all, he was dressed in black with police written in white lettering on the front of his t-shirt. But this man was not a police officer. Rather, he was a very, very, very dangerous 24-year-old young man who was determined to wreak havoc on the streets of Santa Monica. His mission would come to a deadly end inside the Santa Monica College Library. At 11:52 a.m. on June 7th, 2013, a 911 call was dispatched, with the caller saying that they had heard gunshots at the corner of Yorkshire Avenue and Kansas Avenue in Santa Monica, California. When the police arrived at the location, they quickly dispatched the fire department to the scene as there was a structure on fire at the corner where the gunshots had been heard. The home was completely engulfed in flames. While the police and the fire department were tending to the fire, they had no idea that there was an active shooter on the streets. 41-year-old Laura Sisk was driving her blue Mazda hatchback when she saw what she thought was a police officer motioning for her to pull over. Laura followed his commands. Deborah Fine was driving behind Laura, and when she failed to drive forward when the man told her to, he drew up his weapon and aimed his rifle directly at Deborah. Before she could even yell, "No!" he started firing shots at her. Deborah was struck in the left shoulder. She was also struck with various pieces of shrapnel as the shooter continued pulling the trigger, hitting her car. Deborah ducked inside the car and pretended to be dead, hoping to get the shooter to stop shooting at her. While laying towards the center console of her vehicle, Deborah could sense that somebody, presumably the shooter, was walking around her vehicle. She lay as still as she could until she didn't hear any more noises. A person from a nearby house would eventually come to her rescue and administer first aid until an ambulance arrived.
It was like the perfect storm. I saw a man with a Kevlar vest, looking very much like a SWAT team member. I absolutely thought it had something to do with the fact that Obama was in town. When he absolutely aimed at her and the rifle came up, I knew that that wasn't anything somebody from the police would do. He was absolutely on a mission. Everything had been planned out. He was then just in execute mode. I saw his eyes, I saw him point, and then I knew. then I knew that he was really going to shoot. And when I heard the explosion and the glass flying, and I felt something throw me to the side, I knew it was a bullet.
After the shooter had thought that he had successfully killed Deborah, he walked back over to Laura's vehicle and opened the passenger side door and got into the car and set a black duffel bag, which contained more than 1,500 rounds of ammunition, at his feet. He pointed his firearm at Laura and told her to drive. As long as she followed his directions, he wouldn't kill her. Obviously, Laura was absolutely terrified, but she followed his directions. The shooter was calm and quiet while in the vehicle, only speaking when he wanted her to turn onto a different street. Laura was crying and shaking while the shooter continued to tell her to calm down, keep driving. After driving a little ways, the car came up beside bus number 4057 from the Big Blue Bus Company, which was being driven by Lachelle Barr. There were approximately 24 passengers on the bus. Both the Mazda and the bus were stopped at a red light at an intersection. Lachelle had looked out of her window and noticed that there was something hanging from the back window of the blue Mazda that was in the lane next to hers, which was on the left side of the street. She hollered at the driver to try and get the driver's attention, to let her know that there was something in her window. The driver never acknowledged Lachelle, so she decided to beep her horn a couple times. Out of nowhere, gunshots started firing at her bus. All of the passengers, as well as Lachelle, dove on the floor to take cover from the hail of bullets.
I tried waving to get the passengers' attention. I tapped my horn a few times.
Look, you have something hanging there.
And then he opened the door. I just remember a white man in all black with squared off chest in SWAT gear. And he just raised his rifle and started shooting through the window.
Lachelle knew that she had to get her and her passengers out of this deadly situation, and fast. From the floor, she jumped up to her driver's seat, threw the bus and drive, and floored her accelerator to get out of the gunfire. She was able to get her bus out of the line of fire and to safety. 3 people had been injured on her bus. But because of the quick thinking of Lachelle Barr, she had saved every single person's life on her bus that day. After the shooter had fired at the bus multiple times, he instructed Laura to continue driving, and terrified, she complied. As the two were approaching the intersection of Pico Boulevard and Cloverfield Avenue, the shooter told Laura to stop in the middle of the intersection. Laura followed his instructions and stopped the vehicle, and the shooter got out and started firing his weapon at random. He was standing in the middle of the intersection, firing bullets, spinning around in a circle while pulling the trigger. During this time, many businesses had called 911 to let them know that they heard gunshots and didn't know what to do. They were advised to stay in their buildings until further order. As the shooting was happening, the president was no more than 2 miles away. Police and dispatch were perplexed. They didn't know if this was a diversion to keep police busy so someone could get at the president, or maybe it was gang-related. It wasn't clear how many shooters there were because it seemed the crime scene just kept moving. They didn't know what to think at this point. After the shooter finished firing at the intersection, he got back into Laura's Mazda and instructed her to drive to Santa Monica College. As she drove towards the college, the shooter continued to shoot bullets out the window at random. He told her to drive to a parking lot at the college. Once she was at parking lot number 1, she put the car in park and the shooter exited the vehicle and told her that she is free to go, as her job was done now.
911 emergency. I was kidnapped by the machine gun man at Santa Monica College. He made me drive in there, pointed a machine gun at me, and got in my car. Okay, where are you now? I'm at the Palm Motel at Chevron. I'm going to have an officer meet you there, okay? Stay on the phone. Okay.
The shooter began to walk across parking lot number 1 at Santa Monica College, randomly firing his weapon at different cars. A red Ford Explorer was driving near the shooter. He held up his rifle, aimed at the driver, and pulled the trigger. He also shot the passenger of the Explorer. The driver lost control of the vehicle, and it came to a stop when it crashed into a brick wall near the parking lot.
I live right next door to Santa Monica College, and I was in the at my kitchen window looking out, and I heard the gunshots and saw the car swerve and crash through the wall. And I ran out there, and police just started pulling up and yelling at everybody to get out, and students were running by screaming, and I was pretty shook up.
After leaving the parking lot, the shooter headed towards the liberal arts building. Before entering the building, he dropped his duffel bag right outside the doors and continued into the building. There were over 300 people, both students and staff, inside the building, and all of them were later interviewed by the police and reported that they had been shot at.
He looked at me, and then he just panned over with his gun, and I jumped out of the way, and he shot at me. I heard probably another 3 or 4 single shots, and then just a barrage of firing. He just seemed very calm. He wasn't fidgety, he wasn't moving around a whole lot. He just was standing there, like panning around, looking for targets.
After leaving the liberal arts building, the shooter headed towards the library, where about 100 students were studying for their upcoming final exams. Before entering the library, he would shoot and kill a 68-year-old female who was outside the library collecting recyclables to return for extra money. The students had little to no advance warning that there was a shooter on the college campus, which didn't give them much time to react. Several students and staff were able to hide in a closet where their money and safe was kept and locked the door. The shooter yelled at the terrified group, saying that he was a police officer and needed everyone to come out. Every person stood silent, frozen with fear. Just a few seconds later, he opened fire and started shooting at the closet doors. Bullets were hitting the wall and drywall, ricocheting every which way. Miraculously, no one was killed or even injured. While the shooter was inside, terrorizing the staff and students, Sergeant Raymond Bottenfield from the Santa Monica Campus Police Department was just outside the library. It was his day off, but he had to come onto campus that morning to attend a meeting. He wasn't in a police uniform, nor did he have his bulletproof vest on. He didn't even have his service weapon on him. All he had was his off-duty personal firearm, which was a lot less powerful than his on-duty service weapon. After hearing gunshots, a loud crash, and police radio dispatch reported shots fired at the college, he decided to pursue the situation to see what he could do to help. Though he didn't know it at the time, the loud crash he had heard was the red Ford Explorer hitting the brick wall. When Sergeant Bottenfield approached the college, he had met up with 2 other officers who worked for the Santa Monica Police Department, Officer Jason Salas and Officer Robert Sparks. The 3 officers had recently attended an active shooter training, though they didn't know each other. They still had the training to know what to do in the case of an active shooter situation. After the shooting at Columbine High School in 1999, police officers were taught to pursue the threat and ultimately eliminate the threat. They were trained to diamond up or create a diamond formation where there is 1 officer in front, 2 on the sides, and 1 in the back, facing backwards so that all sides are covered, making it near impossible for anyone to sneak up on the officers. Because there were only 3 officers, they had to make the best of what they had. Officers Salas and Sparks were in the front, with Sergeant Bottenfield bringing up the rear, since Salas and Sparks had full police gear on and Sergeant Bottenfield was only wearing pants and a polo-type shirt. The 3 officers decided they must enter the library to eliminate the threat as soon as possible. Because of the way the sun was shining on the building, they couldn't see inside the windows to see where the shooter might be. They were essentially entering the library blind, not knowing where their predator may or may not be. As the officers entered the building, they saw the shooter standing in the foyer area of the library. Before Officer Salas could even get the word "police" out to announce themselves, the shooter turned around and opened fire at the 3 police officers, who immediately exchanged gunfire with the man. The shooter went down to the ground, somehow dropping his rifle, but he was able to pick it right back up again. As the officers were shooting at him, he was able to pull the trigger on his rifle, still firing rounds at random. Finally, the shooter stopped moving. The police officers were able to put the shooter's hands behind his back and put handcuffs on him. One officer kicked the rifle out of the shooter's hand just to make sure that he couldn't pick it up again. The officers pulled the gunman out of the library and onto the sidewalk, where he was pronounced dead. The crime scene was huge, over 1.5 miles long, and the police didn't even know where to start. One thing was for certain. The shooting spree had started at the structure fire on the corner of